We're joined for the hour by Alpesh Patel, Principal at Profilion Group. Alpesh, good to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
And to talk about the Conservative plans in particular on defence, we're joined by John T. Olive Cooper, head of the Progressive Conservatism Project, if I can say it, at the think tank Demos. I think I just about squeezed it out. Good to see you. Thanks very much indeed for coming in. Let's talk about what David Cameron has announced this morning. He says, we're still committed to spending 0.7% of national income in international aid, but we want to redirect the rest of the money to a new way of spending on defence and defence procurement. How is this actually going to work?
So there's two interesting issues here, I think. One is that, in a way, it's very alarming because for a long time, for really the whole history of the Department for International Development, there's been a very strict separation between foreign policy and what is right for the poorest. So this does appear to be a big breach with that. But in fact, when you look at it in a bit more depth, really, it's not such a big change. When we look at the big aid pushes in the last 10 years, a lot of them have been in areas where there's already a lot of military presence in Iraq, in Afghanistan, to an extent in Sierra Leone. So already, although there's that strict boundary in theory, it's been quite muddied in practice. And we already have teams like the Stabilisation Unit, which are joint between the different departments, Foreign Office, MOD, and International Development already. So perhaps it's not quite such a big change.
Alpesh, how do you view this? I mean, from an investor point of view, of course, if you've been investing in certain defence stocks, you would have done very well out of this, you know, what's been going on in conflict. But yeah, how do you just view the whole discussion?
I'm pleased he made the announcement at Chatham House, where I'm a trustee. Enough of the plug for that think tank. In terms of the economics of it, I'm not worried in the least when we look at companies like British Aerospace, the kind of procurers who'd be winning some of the contracts. And the reason for that is defence budgets around the world, among some of the fastest growing economies, are increasing. So if there's any decline in defence spending in the United Kingdom in an effort to cut the budget deficit, I think that'll be more than made up for by the British companies or the companies listed on the FTSE by them winning contracts elsewhere. So from an economic perspective, not concerned. From a markets perspective, more broadly, it's interesting to see the national security apparatus will be very much like the American model in an effort to add legitimacy to decisions on conflict. Now, that should, from a macro perspective, add a bit more credibility, legitimacy and stability when these decisions are made, and that should trickle down to greater confidence in the broader markets, the broader economy, in terms of what we're doing going forward in Britain. Just broadening this out slightly, why do you think more private equity groups haven't got into it? Are they still suffering from the bloodied nose that they've had over the last 18 months? And do you see them, and with cheaper pound, do you see them getting more proactive in M&A more generally with UK companies?
I certainly do see them becoming more proactive in M&A in UK over the next quarters. And one of the key indicators that, if you remember, we used to talk about a lot is the iTraxx crossover rate. This is the rate which indicates at what level high-yield debt, which is the high-yield debt which is used by private equity groups in leverage takeout situations, with financing themselves in the bubble up to 2007. It was very cheap credit that they could get, even in high-yield form. To give you an idea, the spread and the additional percentage points that you're having to pay for that debt today is somewhere around 300 basis points or 3 percentage points more for your high-yield debt today than you were 2 years ago, although that has already come down because credit markets have opened up. And I think that is still a challenge. But as we look forward, as the credit markets continue opening up, and particularly in this sector, cash-generative sector, which can effectively finance and service the financing of these high-yield situations, I think that certainly in this sector, this is a sector which is pregnant with deals, and with the credit markets opening up, there will be many more. Now, clearly the point about Cadbury is valuation and the stretch. This would have been a relatively straightforward situation in the credit market conditions of 2007. But with 300 basis points difference potentially in terms of high-yield financing is a much tougher. It's a much tougher.
But you see the tipping point coming this year, where there's more of a flood of M&A activity,
yes.
or do you see it next year?
No, I see it this year. Already the iTraxx has come back about 200 basis points from its high. So clearly that is moving in the right direction. As it moves in the right direction, and we're seeing more leverage and more risk put up by the traditional syndicates of global banks that tend to support these deals. And we've seen a number of deals beginning to come through and kicking into action at the back end of the third quarter and the fourth quarter. And I would certainly see momentum gaining there.
What do you make of that, Alpesh?
Well, I was going to ask, what's the cost of this service? I mean, saying in Greece it's a 15% uptake, so I'm assuming it's a relatively low cost, which would mean that it shouldn't be too difficult for the company to expand.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The cost ranges, it's on a per-country basis, it ranges between about 1,000 to 2,000 euros, and it's all an upfront fee for the 20-year storage period.
Would you use it, Ross? Because that's probably a good test of whether or not the stock pick's a good stock pick.
Well, I'd sort of have to look at it and see what it's all about, and the process of what you have to do to get the blood at that particular moment.
Yeah,
I suppose
it's actually quite simple. It's almost like packing it into a bag and shipping it off with a UPS or DHL type provider. So the actual process is quite simple. Cryogenic preservation, once preserved, it's in a freezer for 20 years.
All right, just get my head
very
around.
Star Trek.
Yeah, exactly.
The one thing you should remember about this service is this is the largest player, and they're the largest player by a large margin. They're about 50% of the market is controlled by CryoSave. The next player down is a company called Vita34 with only 25% of the market, and the rest is quite fragmented between much smaller players. So there's a lot of opportunity for growth by acquisition, and the company just announced its third consecutive quarter of record storage volumes, and this during a recession. So clearly, there's a lot of room for growth as the economy picks up.
Okay, there's a couple of other companies here. Immunodiagnostic Systems.
Yeah, a real tongue twister. Short name is IDS.
Right, I might prefer that. IDS, right, yes.
This is a diagnostics manufacturer. They specialize in vitamin D testing kits. That's their flagship range. Vitamin D testing has gone through explosive growth. The market is growing roughly around 50% annually, and that's because more and more diseases are being linked to vitamin D deficiency. Traditionally, you had the bone-related diseases, such as all the different forms of arthritis that were related to vitamin D deficiency, but increasingly you're starting to see it as a biomarker of completely unrelated diseases like various types of cancers. And you're seeing this come through in the figures. Their last interim results showed 100% growth in their vitamin D sales. So there's a real market for this. The market is now, if you like, and the company is in prime position to benefit from it.